Welcome, everyone. Welcome to tonight's educational forum on marginalized communities, looking at a world of marginalization. My name is Kathy Jones, president of the League of Women Voters of Alabama, and I want to welcome you here. And if you'll put your name in the chat and where you're from, this forum tonight is a collaboration with the League of Women Voters of Alabama and the Human Rights Campaign of Alabama. The League of Women Voters across the United States continues to stand and fight for the rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and asexual communities. I'm really looking forward to tonight's forum, in spite of the fact that it's going to be a tough conversation, but it's important and it's necessary. And tonight, we'll get updates on the horrific laws and policies that the state legislature has enacted, which is harming transgender children and also effectively silencing marginalized communities and the voices of our friends, family members, and others in our communities. And through this discussion, we will get a better understanding of the direct threats and the barriers that many LGBTQ plus Alabamians are facing, so that we can stand together as allies to hold our elected leaders accountable for harmful policies and laws that are violating civil and voting rights. And we all need to create and build relationships with folks who are fighting on the same team, fighting many of the same battles, and we're stronger together. I want to welcome you again tonight, and I am pleased to hand the mic over to Jordan Giddens, senior organizer of the Human Rights Campaign, overseeing the community outreach for Alabama and Mississippi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. It's a pleasure to be here and represent not only the Human Rights Campaign, but the LGBTQ plus community of Alabama. Over the last year, we've seen record numbers of attacks on LGBTQ individuals in the community, with over 550 anti-LGBTQ laws introduced across the nation in state legislative sessions this year alone, a 200% increase year over year. This has profound effects on the community, but this starts with voting. LGBTQ individuals represent record numbers of the voting bloc, with the 2022 election estimating that a record 10% of the population was estimated to be part of the LGBTQ plus community. This number is expected to increase to 15% by 2030 and 20% by 2040. LGBTQ community is going nowhere. We're getting stronger, but this starts with voting, even in states that are primarily red or with supermajorities. It is important that we have legislators and elected officials who are sympathetic and empathetic of the cause, whether they are a member of the LGBTQ plus community or an ally. It's a distinct honor to be here with you all. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Stephanie Butler.
Thank you, Jordan. The League of Women Voters is really proud to work in partnership with the Human Rights Campaign to bring you this panel today. Thank you to everyone who is joining us during the live webinar. If you have questions for the panelists, please make sure to use the Q&A feature to submit your questions for later, and we will get to as many as we can at the end of the discussion. Tonight's event will be live streamed on the League of Women Voters of Alabama Facebook page. On Facebook, our username is LWVAL. The link will be dropped into the chat, and please do share it with your networks. And if you'd like to view or share tonight's presentation at a later date, it will be available afterwards on the League's YouTube channel at LWV Alabama under the Voter Education playlist. Everyone who registered for this event will receive an email with a link to the YouTube. For the folks with us here on the live webinar, to make sure you're paying attention, there will be a little quiz at the end with an opportunity to win 2 prizes. So thank you very much to the Human Rights Campaign for donating 2 $25 DoorDash gift cards as prizes. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our 3 panelists. Victoria Kirby York is the Director of Public Policy and Programs at the National Black Justice Coalition, a civil rights organization dedicated to the empowerment of Black, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, plus, and same-gender loving people, including people living with HIV and AIDS. In this role, VKY leads the organization's federal and state public policy agenda and signature programs, the Black Institute, Out on the Hill, Wisdom, and James Baldwin Legacy Awards. Daye Pope is a gender justice advocate who has been organizing LGBTQ communities for over a decade to change narratives, oppose discriminatory laws, and fight for equality. As Director of Civic Engagement with T.A.K.E, a trans-led organization located in Birmingham, Daye works to get trans and non-binary communities more deeply engaged in the political process. And finally, Carmarion D. Anderson-Harvey is the Alabama State Director with the Human Rights Campaign and is the first transgender person of color to serve in a leadership role with HRC. She has a background in public health and education, focused on HIV/AIDS and other health disparities that impact marginalized communities. And she's the founder and previous executive director for Black Trans Women, Inc., the first national nonprofit organization with a programmatic focus to uplift Black transgender women. Carmarion also serves in leadership for the Trans Saints Ministry of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, TFAM, and previously served as an associate elder and minister at the Living Faith Covenant Church in Dallas. Thank you all so much for being here with us tonight. We really appreciate your time. I'd like to start by giving you the opportunity to talk about your organizations and the work that you do, but I want to ask you to also focus on the people who are you fighting for. Who are you working for? And Carmarion, we'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much. I'm so grateful for this partnership and all of the panelists and the participants on this evening. So I have served as the Alabama State Director with the Human Rights Campaign. I'm embarking my 4th year as an Alabamian and leading the work for our national office, which is located in DC. We are a remote office, and so we have the privilege to work statewide. Our organization is the largest and oldest civil rights organization working on behalf of full equality for the LGBTQ plus community. And I'd like to make a disclaimer in this state. I feel that our work intersects throughout Alabama and every identity of the LGBTQ plus community, whether that's going to be policy legislation, whether that's going to be nonprofit work, which is going to be your educational arm for our educational K through 12, higher institutions, HBCU, HIV health equity, adoption. I mean, there's just so much more. So everything that's intersectional. Being that we are the largest institution for civil rights for LGBTQ+, that is a heavy hand for us here in the state because of the intersectional work, we have to be plugged in day to day. There's a lot of disparities that we still face here in the state of Alabama that we'll be speaking about later this evening, but I am excited that I get an opportunity to lead the work on behalf of HRC and for our LGBTQ members of Alabama, including our allies and our co-conspirators.
Co-conspirators, I love it. I love it. VKY, tell us about NBJC, the work that you do and the people that you're working for.
Yes, NBJC stands for the National Black Justice Coalition. We turned 20 years old later this year, and we fight for the interests of Black, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer plus, and same gender loving people, as well as people living with HIV, as was shared. And we really do this work for those who have been kicked out of their homes, who live on the streets, who are living in and experiencing things that really can shake you to your core as a human being, let alone someone trying to survive and thrive on this earth. Much of the work that we do centers on health and wellness, including reproductive and sexual health work, as mentioned, HIV/AIDS, but has recently included Mpox and COVID as both of those viruses have taken hold of our globe and in some parts in our country. We also have a long history of doing work in the education space, especially with historically Black colleges and universities. But also where we can with young folks as it relates to mental health and the over-disciplining of Black, queer, trans, and non-binary youth in schools. We also do quite a bit of work with federal agencies and the White House on these issues, including technology justice or injustices when it comes to algorithms and some of the content used in the digital space, and also to end the epidemic of violence facing Black transgender women and other forms of gender-based violence impacting all Black women and girls. And so, because the majority of Black, queer, trans, and non-binary people live in the South, a lot of our work does take place in the South. And as someone with deep roots in Alabama, I'm really excited and glad to be with you all today. My father's side of the family, I know, is cheering that I'm a part of this conversation today.
Thank you. And we're happy to claim you as an Alabamian.
Yeah. Any Athens, Huntsville, Tanner area folks in North Alabama on the call, raise the roof.
All right, Daye, tell us about your work at T.A.K.E and the people that you serve in Greater Birmingham and beyond.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Like they said, my name is Daye Pope, she, her. I'm Director of Civic Engagement with T.A.K.E, which stands for Transgender Advocates Knowledgeable Empowering. I want to upfront ask for your grace because I'm currently getting over COVID. So if I'm sounding stuffed up or if I go off camera for a second to blow my nose, forgive me. But this is just such an important conversation. I really didn't want to miss it. T.A.K.E has been doing incredible work across Alabama for a decade now. We just celebrated 10 years, started by an amazing Black trans woman, Darrenisha Duncan Boyd, who's still our executive director. And it's really started from the ground up with her experience of seeing all the different barriers that she was facing, and then that her family, her friends, her community members were facing that nobody seemed to be addressing at the time. And so what started as her just bringing people together, really, around her kitchen, and giving people rides to and from appointments just in her own personal vehicle, over time has been built into this nonprofit group that really provides so many services to clients around the state, especially in the Birmingham area. All trans folks, but especially still centering trans women of color, Black trans women. And T.A.K.E.'s vision has really been that we have to meet the immediate needs of our community before anything else, because in Alabama, we know there's incredible rates of poverty. So many of the clients that come to us have been discriminated against in employment for being trans. They've had run-ins with the incarceration system or just hanging out outside. They've been profiled. They've had to go through survival, sex work, and other experiences like that have made them more vulnerable to violence and to HIV and so many other negative consequences of the system really failing to provide for them. And so T.A.K.E provides for them. And of the last couple of years has really been trying to figure out and put into practice, how do we not just meet the immediate needs that our folks are coming to us with because these systems have failed them, but how do we actually help empower them to be a part of the voice and the solution so that the systems no longer fail them and the next person coming up from the community doesn't have to go through all the same traumas and barriers that they've had to face. So it's really all about the Black trans folks across Alabama. We do serve, all folks, all trans folks, anyone who comes to us and needs it, but that's our central focus. And it's trying to go from just meeting the immediate needs to really building up everybody's leadership and their sense of their own civic power and political power so that we can transform things so that we're not continuing to just, use the bucket to bail the ship out, but we actually plug the hole in the ship, so to speak. So thank you. I'm really, really grateful to be a part of this conversation.
So let's get into it. VKY, this question is going to be for you first. A lot of the conversation gets focused on national elections. That's really where the spotlight is, especially now. But while that 2022 national election, the turnout was great. There was a lot of pro-equality politicians that were put into office. But back down here at the state level, we were just blown away with anti-LGBTQ plus attacks at state and local level. There was over 500 anti-LGBTQ plus bills introduced in state houses across the country, and over 70 of them have become law. How are we supposed to keep up with all this?
That's a great question. I think often organizations will focus in on national races because frankly, it's easier, right? It gives people one kind of focal point to galvanize around, whether your chapter is in Alabama, Tennessee, or California. But the most meaningful work, the work that's going to have the most immediate impact on people's lives, happen at the state and local level. And those positions, there are a lot more of those positions, right? So when we look at the number of federal races that people vote for, you're really talking about president, the U.S. Senate, U.S. House of your U.S. House of Representative, right? And so it becomes a lot easier for organizations to message around a federal or national agenda, whereas at the local level, you have city council members, county councilors, you have, sewage and water sometimes, dog catcher, the mayor, the sheriff, there's some other judicial seats that people run for, and it's a lot more to keep track of. And in some places, like in Maryland, you have multiple people in your state legislature that you have the opportunity to vote for in addition to your state senators. And so it can sometimes be harder to get all of the information about all of these different races out to the everyday person, but that's really the work, right? And so I urge individuals and also organizations not to take the easy way out in terms of focusing solely on the top of the ticket and hoping that, people will mimic their values from the top of the ticket to the local, because often people's decisions made on those state and local races come down to who's had enough resources to build a good ground game, right? Of people coming out to knock on your door and have conversations, or if the candidate has the capacity to do it, especially for candidates coming from more marginalized communities, like some of the members of our Good Trouble network of Black LGBTQ plus and same gender loving elected officials. Many of them don't have $1 million jobs, that's taking care of their salary, that they're able to, take some time off to go knock on doors. Some of them have, 2 and 3 kids. One of our electeds has 5 kids, right? On top of a job that doesn't pay as well, on top of, their elected responsibilities that may only give them a $30,000 a year salary, in which they're also responsible for getting to and from the Capitol on, right? And so, it means that you're less likely to get that personal door knock from that candidate that might be more likely to speak your values and your interests than you are to get tons of mailers, perhaps even ads on their local radio from that candidate that is is self-financing their run because they can, right? But may not have your best values at play, but maybe the only candidate you've had the opportunity to hear from. And so our work is educating people about what these local roles are, how they impact our day-to-day lives in real meaningful ways, and making sure people are clear where candidates stand on these issues impacting our community, making sure they're being held accountable and that people have as many opportunities as possible to ask hard questions about where candidates stand on these issues.
Does anybody want to jump in on talking about local races and politicians and the importance of keeping the focus local before we talk a little bit more about legislation? I just want to give you a chance before I shift.
Yeah, I think VKY did an exceptional job. I know here in Alabama, respectfully, we have a couple of races currently going on. In Alabama, the reason why local races are important is because, where we're trying to move to our next dimension is not working in the current structure. And that's because of our current elected officials, how they are getting voted in. We are having issues around our redistricting, which is minimizing the very voices we need to take our state to its next dimension. And so, like VKY said, I am humorous, so I take it all the way down to, do you have an appropriate homeowners association director? Let's start there, because they have much power that then feeds into your city council and then your commissioner and then the House and the state Senate, and then we move up to our congressional. All of that connects. And the challenge we have in this state, if I may respectfully say, is what we call this party line approach. Is that we've always done it this way, and we're going to continue to do it because it's what makes sense to us currently when voting time comes, versus reimagining what are the things that are lacking, and if we can identify those, our ears open up to those candidates that are speaking our wish list. And that starts from a state level, that local race. And if we can get our local races intact, we will then see a shift in our federal. And then we won't have the playground election when it comes down to our presidential race. They all connect. And so one of the challenges also in Alabama is, are we really showing up to make our vote and our voices count? Some of us still have the attitude that, our votes don't count. We're not a battleground state. No one is paying attention to us. And I want to kind of just offer that we are a civil rights state. We are in every history making that there is. People, our forefathers and mothers and ancestors fought hard for us to pay attention to these races in order to have the appropriate representation that is going to take all of our narratives. We're a southern state. Southern hospitality is important, and we need to reflect that in our local races through visibility, and as well through the legislation and the decisions that we're making. And it starts with the local race that will feed up to the governor's office all the way to our congressional seating.
Yeah, yes, our ancestors and our history, but it's still even today. Alabama is constantly in the news. And I want to point out something that is definitely in statewide news, because when there are successes and wins, I definitely feel like we need to talk about them. So a little bit of LGBTQ plus history was made this week. Alabama's first trans person recently ran as a candidate for political office. It was in House District 55. We had a special election. Sylvia Swain, a trans woman, was one of the top 2 vote getters, and she'll be competing in a runoff election on October 24th. Y'all write it down, October 24th, your next chance to vote. Ms. Swain, she really largely stuck to policies and issues of concern of the community during her campaign. Why or does her gender identity matter in any of this?
Yeah, I think from someone who's also part of the trans-identified community in a public figure role, I think where our legislation has been under attack for our transgender population, particularly our youth, when we speak about this particular candidate, is still part of our young adult who can connect with those youth, who can be a sense of hope, as well as, in a Bible Belt state such as Alabama, we don't have a lot of individuals that are marginalized, such as the trans-identified community, that do show up and take that wonderful way of running for office. My take is that, whichever candidate wins the race, for that particular candidate, the history and the visibility and knowing the possibilities is there for us here in Alabama. And I'm hoping that, we will continue that trajectory. Shameless plug, we also must highlight that there were other candidates in that particular race that also tend to make somewhat history as well. We have not really fully had someone that was Black, same gender loving part of the LGBTQ plus community, that also feels that Alabama should change its trajectory on having appropriate visibility, especially when we speak about our Black Belt communities and who's representing them. And it's not so much just, about I'm running, but can you connect with the constituents? Is your people's first language? Can you take that and articulate that in the role of your elected official? Visibility is important. But yet, for someone so inspired and who's part of our trans-identified community, my community, among others, I think it was just very much an opportunity to give us all hope. That we too can take our voice and our passion and be dedicated to run. I am under the impression that if you have a voice and if you know how to articulate, run for somebody's office. Elected officials, as I like to say, because hopefully one day I'll go down that route if that is my purpose. But you learn while doing the work. The commitment is I'm taking my passion and the passion of my promises and the community and my district or the region that I'm representing, and I'm going to learn from them, take them with me while I also learn the politics in order to push the efforts that my constituents and that I believe in. And a lot of times the way we are even looking at our redistricting, it is just wonderful that a candidate such as someone who's trans-identified, and even the opposing a candidate who is a co-conspirator to the LGBTQ plus community, who's a sergeant in the police department, and in that self, we already know how we feel about police office here in the Deep South, to sit there and say, we want to see change in this district. We want to go to the state house and produce the change, which will allow other districts to know that you too, in your marginalized state, can show up and run for office and make a great difference to move us to our next dimension.
And Daye, let me ask you, have you seen and heard that kind of feedback based on this very public transgender woman running for office? Do you hear people talking about that they see themselves represented in politics? Are they seeing it?
I think you can't do what you can't see. So every time that we have one of our community members leading, whether that's one of our organizations like Daye, Carmarion, or whether that's Sylvia, who is just a really wonderful person and was a speaker at our recent town hall, I think that does inspire people. And we hear when we have these kinds of events where trans people who are running for office come in front of our clients and in front of our community members, we actually have people come up to us afterwards and say, I didn't know that we could do that. And that's the power of role models and possibility models. So I think this is a beautiful thing for Alabama.
And I would just add that when it comes to ensuring that all members of a community are included in legislation that's drafted and then becomes law, you have to have participation, right? And, it's great to have people come, on an advocacy day to talk about the issues and why it's important. But ultimately, the people who are actually writing it and get to vote on it are the people who've been elected by their constituents to be in that space. And as long as there's no representation from a particular community, there's no guarantee that once all the constituents are out of the room and it's only the elected officials and perhaps some of their staff making what ends up coming out of the messy legislative process, you want to have someone who can speak to your issues directly with true lived experience, who can make sure that there's someone to say, hey, wait a minute, if you don't include, this particular provision, this bill is not going to meet the needs of this entire swath of Alabamians, right? And so, inclusion requires participation, and that participation has to be in all parts of the process. It can't just be in the who's making the phone call. Yes, we have to do that, but we also need to have people in that decision-making space. And so I'm excited to hear about her race, and, I hope folks who are tuning in and others take a look at I'm trying to stay C3 here, take a look at what she's doing to be able to bring that representation into the legislature.
So when you did your introduction, Daye, you talked about how the organization started off largely providing basic services and then transitioned into a space for advocacy and empowerment. I would love for you to talk about how you made that transition and how the work is going now.
Yeah, thank you for that. We still do so much direct service work that's still incredibly needed. And I think it really evolved out of conversations around Darrenish's overall vision for the organization, our founder, which was that we weren't going to just meet the immediate needs that really the government and the communities should be providing, but eventually we wanted to build leadership and really bring our community members to a greater level of empowerment and independence in their lives. And so we've helped a lot of clients in a lot of different ways move into gainful employment, their own apartment, all kinds of, moves towards independence like that means so much to people who have been failed in so many ways. And we know that true independence and truly stepping into their power isn't just that they now have their needs met and can live their life, but it's that they also know what issues are going on in the state and in the federal government, that they can get out and vote, that they maybe run for something themselves, or they join local committees, or they start their own organization. So we have tried to do a kind of wraparound approach where when folks come to us for one service, of course, if your immediate need is housing, we're going to address that first. But then we want to talk to you more about what your dreams are, what your hopes are. Are you registered to vote? Do you know what's at stake? Do you know what the legislature has been up to? And especially for folks who have survival on their mind, that's often not the first thing that they have the capacity to engage with. But our goal is to bring them along so that their survival is assured, and then we can help bring them into spaces where they can hear from a Sylvia Swain, where they can talk to other community members, where they can practice using their civic voice. And I think what both of my fellow panelists said about local races, it kind of comes back to that a lot of these folks don't have a sense of their own power because there's so many losses in these big statewide races. Maybe they feel like their voice doesn't matter in big federal races, but sometimes folks can get a sense of their own power by winning a crucial local battle, or by getting an ordinance in their city, or even just by, starting their own support group and getting their own apartment when that hasn't been possible for them. So the work is so much about just meeting all these different needs, but also seeing there's a spiritual need, there's a kind of deeper morale need for folks to feel like they can step up into being full citizens and having their voices heard.
Stephanie, do you mind if I piggyback on something just really quick? I feel I'm warmed up now. Okay, so I think if folks don't know who I am, it is what it is. I've lasted this long. I think one of the pieces, this is an educational. We're not in position. We have to be bipartisan kind of a mindset in responding. But there is still an educational lens to this. Is that in Alabama? And listen to me, good people in Alabama. I know this was recorded. We have to start paying attention to candidates in every local race. We can't think of candidates like a coloring book that I see myself. I can color myself. I can color the little girl who's in the flower patch. I can color her brown and voila, that's who she is. What is she saying? And I think it's important that we miss the opportunity of listening when they are on the trail of what their promises and what their hopes and what their passions are, outside of the desperate need of, yes, we want that representation, we want that visibility. But I also know that also can come when you build relationships. When you go down to the state house or you talk to your district or elected official rep and let them know that it's your district that puts you in office, and build a relationship. A lot of times what we are facing in Alabama is that we don't take the time to educate them in regards to our narrative, our district narrative, our community narrative. And so they only are going to respond based off what they know, our party line, or something that's going to be a political score. I'll say amen to that. I don't need no amens, okay? I am a preacher, but I'll say amen myself. And so it is very crucial that we take the opportunity with a listening ear and to see from their campaign trail, when it's voting time, is their message consistent? Does it speak to the level of the campaign that they're on? So our district or our congressional area, does it really speak to us? Can we hold them accountable? How would they respond if we did? All of that makes for a great candidate, and as well as our hope to see ourselves in that candidate, and also hopefully one day for us that are marginalized, we continue to make history with that marginalization of our leadership to make a difference here in Alabama. But I don't want us to miss that there is an opportunity for us to listen, track, show up to vote, and hold them accountable and build those level of relationships because it will be the people's vote on any candidate. And when they get in office, even if you didn't vote for them, go and build that relationship like you did so you can have your voice heard by that candidate. Because guess what? Their position will expire and they will rerun again for some type of office unless, unfortunately, legally they can't, you understand. And they're going to need us to keep them in office.
Yeah, and they might not have gotten your vote, but they certainly are supposed to serve all of us. DKY, go ahead.
That's right. The piece about showing up is so huge because ultimately that's what elections are. It all comes down to math. It all comes down to whose supporters show up more. There were two elections that really took me by surprise in the last decade. Most recent one was the Georgia Senate runoffs a few years ago. And the other was the special election for the U.S. Senate in Alabama when U.S. Senator Jones was elected. And for me, the biggest takeaway was that in those races, there was an intention and attention paid to ensuring that communities across these states were being engaged. Communities that had been disenfranchised in the past were coming out, and that voters who had experienced voter intimidation, not only at the polls, which is where often law enforcement agencies kind of focus their efforts, like including the Department of Justice, but also looking at voter intimidation that has taken place in the Black Belt for well over a century now, where employers will, make veiled threats about, what time a person gets off of work or starts work, knowing that those timings is when that person would need to go to cast their vote. Or I hope I don't see you at the, X location that, happens to also be a polling place, right? Those kinds of ways that employers, neighbors in some instances, and other community leaders, right, who once might have donned a white cape, maybe not so much anymore, but still are up to some of the same tactics, haven't stopped taking place. They've not been reported on in the same ways as they used to. It's become just part of what happens. And so, we raised this very issue in conversations with the Department of Homeland Security and with the FBI and other professionals within the Department of Justice. And I think in some of these conversations, when I first started bringing it up, it was kind of like, that happened in the 60s, right? But as people actually started to pay attention to how those kinds of things take shape in communities, the reality hit that it wasn't conjecture or just anecdotes from family members, that these things are continuing to happen. And so that is a part of the story around voter turnout. We talk about getting people encouraged and mobilized, but it's also about getting people moved from a place of fear and trauma, right? Whether that intimidation happened to them or whether they grew up their entire lives hearing their mother or father talk about, being attacked at the polling place, being threatened, having their businesses burned down. These are people that are still living today who are telling those stories to their kids, grandkids, great grandkids, right? In addition to people who are still experiencing these things. And that's also a part of the landscape. On top of, if you also identify as LGBTQ, the discrimination that you face 365 days out of the year, that suddenly you're being told, oh, you won't experience that discrimination at the local church or the local library. That's my polling place because it's election day. Nope, that very rude person at the front door is still going to be there on election day, right? They just may not be a poll worker. And so these are some of the other things that we have to look at and educate people about so that they know what are some of their other options when it comes to vote, and if they experience it, who to call, right, to get relief and to make sure that their rights are protected so that that vote is able to be counted. Because again, it's all about the math. It's all about who shows up. And as shown in those past elections, we know we can. Our values can win in the South. They won in Louisiana. They've won before in Florida, and North Carolina, and Georgia, and in Alabama, in various levels of government, right? In Texas as well. We got to go back maybe 3 decades, but it has happened. It can happen again. It just comes down to who shows up, and we all can play a role in making sure that our people show up.
So, and I want to put in a plug for volunteering as a poll watcher around election times. The stuff that you were talking about, voter intimidation, people's IDs not being accepted, people being turned away from polls, that stuff doesn't get caught and reported unless there are volunteers on the ground watching what's happening. So keep an eye out for opportunities to do poll watching. It is so important, y'all. Another way to get involved, and unfortunately we have had to get involved just very recently, and I saw Carmarion and Daye, I saw both of you actively involved in this work, is the efforts by local governments across the state, Prattville, Huntsville, Shelby County, Ozark, and Dale County, to censor ideas and ban books in public libraries. The alleged concern is protecting children from harmful content, but LGBTQ content is often at the forefront of these controversies. And I'd like to hear about the work that y'all have done and are continuing to do to empower people in those local communities to push back. And Daye, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I know so many other folks in Carmarion have done a lot of work around this, specifically with a town called Ozark. There's this incredible groundswell of grassroots energy fighting for their own library and their own community. And so I think the role of some statewide or larger organizations is always to just support the local leaders who are doing that work and trying to give them more tools, trying to give them more knowledge and advice, more support. But what they've been facing is a mayor and some parts of their city council have actively made jokes about burning books in the library that are LGBT. They have threatened to defund the library if they don't move children's LGBT books that are perfectly age appropriate into the adult section, as if, talking about the existence of trans people or queer folks is inherently, sexual or inappropriate, which we know is just not true. And this is happening across the state. And I know Governor Ivey even started to echo some of these sentiments in the last couple of weeks. And so it's not clear what steps might be taken statewide, which is something that we're looking at. And a lot of these local communities who've been fighting back for a while already are also trying to keep an eye on. But so far, the outpouring of opposition to these attacks has been really encouraging and has stopped a lot of these steps from being taken to remove these LGBTQ books, and has stopped the library as of this point from being defunded. And what's been really inspiring, and I think speaks to what BKY was talking about, that victory is possible in Alabama, is that we've actually talked to a lot of people who say, I've been a lifelong conservative, but I believe in the Constitution, I believe in freedom, and trying to censor books, that's not what I'm into. I think the other side is kind of overplaying their hand and going too far, even for people that aren't star allies of LGBT folks, let's say, but they're going too far. They're overplaying their hand, and everyday people are saying, no, this is getting crazy. You're trying to take away our library because of these, LGBT books. I might not understand all of that, but I know that censoring books is wrong. And so I think the next step is trying to work with these local leaders to turn that groundswell of energy around that one fight into a broader public consciousness, political consciousness about the other fights that we're having in the state, and trying to turn that into some of that grassroots energy that can continue to organize for solving those problems structurally beyond saving the library. Now there's hundreds of people who've been mobilized around the idea that the government is overreaching to censor this content, and how can we work with them to empower them to take those next steps to running for local office, to getting their community members to vote, and keep that energy going, I think, is the next step.
Yeah, and so just to piggyback on Daye said something that was very important for our listeners. As a national organization who have seen this all across the state, we are aware as true organizers that organizing works with those that actually are going to be impacted in their cities. And so we have taken an approach, Daye, I, and other coalition members across the state, to be really a support system to those that are on the ground. They know the environment, they have the relationships, and we don't want to go in like we are there as a saving grace, but let's motivate them and empower them. But let's just be honest here. Maybe I can speak from a lobbyist standpoint, even though this is a C3 website, but it's to give context. I don't know where we have removed the sanctity of a library around education to now a prison system. I want that to sink in. If you look at some of the books that have been selected, they are specifically noting that that's an LGBTQ plus resource, and that's in the eye of the beholders. You have these extremist groups that are creating field trips. This is a coordinating attack because, and let's just be honest, in the last couple of years in Alabama, the horrific legislation that has been very much impactful outside a race lens. We are always going to see those race legislation, black, white, privileged, unprivileged, access, unaccess. But to our LGBTQ plus community, when a couple years ago, when they were not able to win around marriage equality, they had to find something else to do. And when they could not impact us for those that have a lived experience of same gender loving, then they had to find, well, what's another genre of this alphabet soup? Well, let's target the transgender community because it's easier it's easier to do that because of way some of our binary policies are. Okay, as it relates to gender identity on legal documentation, as it relates to discrimination versus a lived current experience versus what you were assigned sex as. Then they took it a step further to want to then target our children. And that's what's linked into the library is they're finding out that these extreme I'm trying to be nice about this because as a Christian affirming clergy, how do we take the culture of us being a Bible Belt, us being really on the precipice of Christianity and use it as a weapon of discrimination? And that's the challenge that I have with these extremists who don't want to live in our state. Let me start there, who is somewhere in a privileged state, who is trying to insert, their agenda and the way of living that they have there into our southern roots, into our southern state. And the library is the only safe and brave space that these youth can go and learn. Let's talk about our educational system. We need our libraries. The libraries has continued to be extra teachers when the classroom are over flooded or lack of teachers being there on a day-to-day basis. That's what the library is there for. But overall, what we have seen from a national and also state, that the books that they are choosing by perception or by their own thoughts are saying that children are being ingrained. And mind yourself, these are in the young adult section, okay? Where it is on their level to learn what history is. Because if we start removing all the diverse pieces, diverse concepts, you just name it, we're not preparing our youth for the real world. And when they get into the real world, they are going to fail. And then we're not retaining our youth to stay residents after college as an adult to continue to cultivate this state, because we're putting so many restrictions. We're sitting here trying to remove books that is reading and education, a perception of the reader, but yet no one wants to talk about the lack of resources we've put in education or taken from education to build prisons. I just want to muddy the water just a little bit. Okay, so we can't, and so when you have our leaders saying we will not be subjective for those that are outside in to tell us what we need to do, well, you're allowing that when it comes down to the LGBTQ plus in our gender and sexual orientation youth community. So what's the difference? We don't need them in our state. We cook with grease and butter at the same time. We eat cornbread dressing, not whatever else that's for Thanksgiving. And we need to make sure that we're keeping the sanctity of what we do in our state to prepare our youth. And these are young adults. Let me give you one fact, and then I'll yield my time. My background is in public health. Many people don't know, and I worked on the STI communicable disease for almost 20 years. A youth in this state is emancipated at the age 13 to 15, depending on their lived experience. Let me say it like that. That can actually go get them tested for STIs and don't need their parents' consent. And the only time the parent or the guardian is inserted breaching HIPAA if they get a reactive and they need to put on medical treatment. I just want that to sink in, because there are opportunities where we need to allow our youth to be young adults so they can learn appropriately. And no, we are not trying to prepare the next generation for anything. What we're trying to do is give them much information so they can be prepared as an adult and come back to this state if they choose to go off for college and help us move to our next dimension. And we cannot allow these extremists to come in and tell us what our kids need to insert themselves like they're the parents and guardians. And we need to support more of our parents and guardians. And that starts with all of us. And it starts with pieces of legislation that gives the parents and the guardians their right permission without us, who are not their parents and guardians, to insert what we think their beliefs should be. I know that was a whole lot. Sorry. I was on my soapbox for a little bit.
No problem, but I am going to abruptly switch subjects because we've only got a few more minutes, and we cannot have this conversation about voting rights without talking about the biggest news that's happened in Alabama, and that is to do with redistricting. I'll just do a quick history. Alabama has 7 congressional districts, and even though Black people are 27% of the population, only one of those 7 districts is made up of a majority of Black voters. But back in June, the Supreme Court ruled that this violated the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and that the maps must be redrawn to include a second majority Black district. The state legislature refused to comply with the Supreme Court's ruling, so just this week, a court-appointed special master produced 3 maps to choose from. It's really big news for Black Alabamians. It's really big news for Alabama generally, but I want to know why this is an issue of concern and interest to the LGBTQ plus community.
Who wants to take that first? Go ahead, DKY.
Yeah, I'll take it. It goes back to what I shared earlier about Southern states, particularly the Black Belt, being where the majority of Black LGBTQ plus people especially live, right? We live in these communities that are being put into these two different districts. So when it comes to communities that can have an outsized voice in talking and electing people in support of the LGBTQ community and our issues, having these two seats help to provide that. There's some research coming from Dr. Ravi Perry, a professor at Howard University, that highlights the reality that both early on and even to this day, a good chunk of the openly LGBTQ elected officials are elected from within Black communities. So even though there's this perception that the Black community is more homophobic than other communities, the reality is that whether it's in Alabama or looking at Atlanta, Baltimore, the Miami area, other areas where there's concentrations of Black folks in minority access districts, when Black, queer, and trans candidates are on the ballot representing those communities, they win. In part because if you are a Black openly LGBTQ plus person and you've made it to be able to have your name on the ballot, people know you've had to fight through some things. You've had to win some battles, and you've had to come out pretty victorious to then have the audacity to go through the process of getting signatures, raising the money to be able to be a part of these campaigns. And you want someone ultimately who's going to fight for you. So of course, when it comes down to representing the interests of our community, regardless of where someone might land on the issues religiously, when it comes down to civil and human rights, especially in Alabama, where that's been such a hallmark in its history, people want to be able to elect people who are going to do the right things by their neighbors, by their family members. And so being able to have these the second district added is not only the right thing to do by the Black community. Ultimately, I do believe it'll help provide people who will be able to have conversations and talk with their fellow lawmakers about the needs of the LGBTQ plus community. And who knows, Alabama in this seat may continue the trend, you know, and the person who's elected for that particular office may be a Black LGBTQ plus person. It's worked out great in other Southern states. And I'm just looking at Elder Anderson-Harvey over there, you know, who I do hope runs for office, because history and the research has shown that Black voters are fair-minded voters, especially when it comes to, you know, our candidates and our issues. When we're looking at issues of voter ID, when we're looking at issues, particularly of people who have to move a lot, when you're looking at issues of class and age, when you're looking at young voters, in addition to changes in voter registration because you've changed your name. These are things that, you know, there are folks who push for voter suppression measures that would make it much harder for people who need to update their registration same day, whether it's because they've moved, because the rent increased and they can no longer afford it, or because they're couch surfing because their family kicked them out of their home when they invited them in that they're LGBTQ plus. You know, all of those issues matter and help to ensure that people who care about our issues are able to cast their vote on election day. And, you know, when we're looking at voter suppression in states like Alabama and other states across the country, those are issues that matter to the Black voters who are going to be voting in this new district. And of course, it matters to LGBTQ plus community and those who sit at the intersection.
And I think the other piece, Stephanie, I mean, when I say that that's probably a great safe way for educational, when we look at what we're facing in redistricting to try to get that second district, yes, and it is focused on the fairness of Black voters. But as your question alluded to, we have not had much conversation because there is a marginalized opportunity as well. Not only will it increase the Black voters, it will increase the LGBTQ plus voters, like BKY said, who are living majority in that area, but it will also the underserved population. You know, there will be some white voices that need to take advantage of this redistricting. And if we really want to elementary say what's happening is that the conservatives are trying to silence the other side from being able to vote. in order so they won't lose power. That first starts with Black, because it's a heavily Black population. It needs to be fair. You know, I dare those powers to be who had an opportunity to comply with the courts and chose to still manipulate and submit nothing that was going to be nothing but gain power and privilege and access. And so you're right. It will be an opportunity to increase Black voting, some type of representation of that candidate who wins that second district. But more importantly, our LGBTQ plus individual will finally have a voice that supports by this new redistricting map that was charged by the court. So that should motivate those folks in this second district, really honestly in all of the Black belt districts, but also for those who have not shown up to vote because they have felt that they have been overlooked. They felt that their voice and vote doesn't count. And the court is saying, we see you, we hear you, we're on your side, and we will not, in our role as Chief Justice and the High Supreme Court, will allow any discrimination to no longer happen in the state of Alabama. Get it right or get removed, and we will step in because the second district is going to happen and we will have fair voting. Can somebody say yes? That's what I'm talking about.
Yes.
And those are the type of leaders that we need to continue to have here in Alabama around voting rights, speaking truth to power, not showing up using themselves perhaps maybe as because listen, we have been thrown away in the Black community. We've been thrown away in the LGBTQ plus community. We are forever under attack in the trans-identified community. But in this season, we are regaining our power wholeheartedly. And I'm hoping that that will also lead us until next state legislature season, which will start in February 2024. And we will show up in a great number with power, and we will cast our votes when these future elections come, because we are on the move and we're not going to stop. There are powers to be that is on our side, and I'm grateful for that.
I mean, that's a good place to end this part of the conversation. It's just to remind everybody that this is a coalition of underrepresented people who have not had a voice, who are getting a voice with this redistricting. I'm going to transition now. You will get a chance for closing remarks, so don't worry. But I did want to transition to taking some audience questions to make sure we make some time for that. Daye, are you aware of any candidate forums for the House 55 runoff? Is your organization or HRC, are you aware of anybody sponsoring one?
Not at this time. No, not yet.
According to the questions, there's interest, so.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea though. And we just have to check into how to do that in a way that is unbiased and clear that we're a C3 group, nonprofit group. But I love the idea and I want to talk to our folks about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do know that there will be some other forums that will be coming down the pipe that I've heard of. I know the question also has the Human Rights Campaign in it, and I just for record purposes, we are also a T.A.K.E organization. So although that in this state, we want to identify those equality leaders, we chose respectfully not to do any level of endorsement in this race because there's multiple community members that we're running, as well as HRC also look at our allies and our co-conspirators. Those are also considered equality leaders. So without having an official endorsement, we are, unfortunately, our hands are tied where we're not able to produce forums or provide much of educational system because of the regulations that we have with our PAC and also C4. But I do know that there will be some forums coming down the pipe for those two wonderful candidates. And all I can say is that if they do have the forums, this group and the listeners, please show up. We want to make sure that we're voting in the right representative who's going to have our best interest and our voice. Because again, we are in a season of change and development, and it is going to start with the race in District 55 among another race that is about to come down the pipe if you keep up with the news.
Yeah. And I have a feeling this question is from one of our league members. They would love to hear anybody's thoughts, whoever wants to pitch in, about the most effective way to do outreach to get LGBTQ plus youth registered.
Something that T.A.K.E.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead.
BKY, go ahead.
Okay. You have to meet them where they are and can't expect them to come to you. My favorite places to register young voters are, well, when I was a little younger, I can't hang anymore like I used to, but used to be outside the nightclubs, conventional wisdom would say, no, people, they might be drinking, may not be a good place for you to go. No, because everyone's not dancing all the time when they're partying. And some people just kind of go to be comfortable, to live their truth around other people. And so I've found nightclubs to be a fantastic place to register voters, both when people are waiting in line, before they go, and before people get a little too sweaty. So the before midnight crowd typically. Also going to DMVs. Some DMVs automatically have voter registration set up, for people when they get their licenses, but some don't. And so setting up there is often a really good place to get young people registered who are just kind of learning how to drive, or getting their full driver's license beyond their permit, because everyone doesn't get it at 15 and 16. Some young people do wait until they're 18 or a little older, or once they've gone to college in some instances. Other great places to register are in parks, community colleges, of course, and universities. Getting students outside of their high school graduations. It's like, yeah, you just got your diploma, now register to vote. And you can also get some of their family members there as well. Libraries are really good places as well. And some of the other places, fun places that young people might want to hang out at, like laser centers? Laser tag, that's what we call it. Laser tag and skating rinks, and places that older teenagers in particular like to go, movie theaters, etc. You want to think about where do the young people in your life go to hang out, and that's where you want to set up that clipboard.
That's right. Daye, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, just briefly, similar concept, go where the people are. We like to do a lot of this at Pride Fests, at nightclubs. We host our own community events. We register our own clients when they come in. So wherever our people are going to be gathering, especially with LGBT folks, with some other populations, you can reliably door knock a neighborhood and reach a lot of who you're trying to reach. But LGBTQ folks don't typically have, a lot of density in neighborhoods as much as we come together around community spaces, nightlife spaces. And so just meeting our folks where they're going to gather.
And then I think the last piece that I will add, I'm a non-traditional, so I feel that, we have to think as their age bracket. Sometimes they won't come to us, or if we go to them, we may be interrupting what they're doing when they showed up. But I think all of those are great. But I think a couple things is that what are your dollars doing to create an atmosphere for youth to want to show up? Listening parties, TikTok, the age appropriate youth things that are out there. Who is your youth gatekeeper that can give you intel and that can introduce you to their social network, and you see them. My background is also research. So when you see someone responding, driven, sampling, or snowballing, then you earn that trust, and then they will go see their friends. And before you know it, you have a whole constituency. What youth are we deputizing in the work that we're doing? What compensation or what incentives can they take as a part-time job to be educated? And then the other piece is working with those youth on the government spectrum or government clubs in higher education, but also in high school that are age appropriate to register. But I'm a big fan that if we create their lifestyle, they will show up and we can still put a message to it and have fun. And they will think you're probably the coolest seasoned person and will ask you, when are we doing this again? You know, when are we doing this again? So I just want us to also think outside the box. I know it can be a little challenging, but we saw in the last election race, presidential election race, it was our youth that showed up in great numbers in our battleground state because they are being creative and non-traditional how they are getting information and voting tools out to our youth. And we can certainly learn from that presidential election. They want to vote and they want to show up, but you know, we can't allow them to show up and then we think that they are still children because their voice and their vote also count as if equally as an adult.
Well, thank you all. I'd want to give you a chance for final thoughts. I will offer a question, but if you want to do your own thing, feel free. My final question is, if you want to leave the people in this meeting with some tools and resources that they can access in their own communities, take back to their own communities to continue the work, what can we give them? BKY, what you got?
Yeah, so there are 2 resources that I dropped in the chat that I want to share for those who might be tuning in on Facebook. One is powerthepolls.org, which is a partner site for folks who are interested in being poll workers. We definitely need fair-minded folks and people who are culturally competent when it comes to the LGBTQ plus community, especially for transgender and non-conforming voters. Make sure we don't have poll workers who turn people away, not because it's even legally allowed to do so, but because of their own ignorance. And so, or lack of knowledge. So powerthepolls.org is one site, and then nbjc.org, our website. If you go to nbjc.org/OOTH, we just had our Out on the Hill events associated with the Congressional Black Caucus annual legislative conference. And as a part of that, we rolled out a Vote Ready toolkit. So if you scroll down to the bottom of that page, there's a PowerPoint deck that has a ton of different voter resources connected to organizations that can help folks see information about voting rights restoration. If you've have a felony on your record or a returning citizen, it has information specific to voting about trans, and includes information about other forms of voter ID, like being able to get a 3rd gender marker with the U.S. State Department on your passport, or getting a credit card from one of the companies that allow you to get to have your name reflect the name that you use in the day-to-day life, which can be used in many places as a form of ID to vote. And a whole host of other resources, information for who to call if for voter protection, or if you've experienced intimidation in your community. So definitely want to make sure folks see that resource. And we work with a number of grassroots organizations around the country, as well as Black LGBTQ plus and same gender loving elected officials and our Good Trouble network. And if we can ever connect you, with people who are a part of our community, we'd love to do that as well. We have a contact form on our main page you could fill out and ask any questions that you have there, so that we can connect you to people in your community organizing and working on behalf of Black, queer, trans, and non-binary people.
Amazing. Daye, I'm going to come to you next. And I first want to say thank you so much for being here and for toughing it out. I know that you're still recovering and don't feel good. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. We made it. We made it, everyone. This has been such a great conversation. Thank you, Stephanie, for really putting so much of this together and moderating. I do want to give a shout out because I know Dory Miles is on the call. And we have worked with Greater Birmingham Ministries, and they're doing a lot of amazing work with getting folks voting rights restored in Alabama. And that's been really meaningful to some of our clients who've had run-ins with the incarceration system. So thank you. Really at the heart of it, I think what we're facing in Alabama right now is that we don't have a critical mass of people power yet to stop the kinds of attacks that are constantly coming down the pike towards our community. And that's why, bills that have criminalized trans youth healthcare have been passed and are now going through complicated legal challenges that I am not going to share much about. But there's so many attacks. Trans youth have been banned in sports. Many people around the state are discriminated against every day and don't have recourse. And there's so many other things that I could name. And the main reason why that's happening is that we don't yet have the kind of swell of public support and organizing that we need to actually stop that from happening, to elect the right people, to hold the elected people accountable. And so that's what we're all, I think, on this call trying to build is how do we build that critical mass of people, especially when there are structural barriers like the gerrymandering that are still being dealt with, like the voter suppression and intimidation that VKY was talking about. If this trans youth healthcare ban goes into effect and the abortion ban that's also is in effect statewide, these are also voter suppression and intimidation in a way, because some people are actually moving out of our state because they can't get the healthcare that they need, or they're afraid of losing access to the healthcare. And guess who those people are that are leaving the state? They're probably not supporting the people who passed such policies, right? And if you do charge doctors who prescribe certain medication with felonies, then they have to go through a process to get their voting rights restored. So we're seeing all of these very creative, I guess is a charitable way of putting it, ways to dampen our spirits, to dampen our voices, to keep us from being able to participate in the process. And when you rig the game for long enough, people start to feel like, well, why should I take part in this? It's not going to change. I know how this works. This is not my game. This is their game. So we have to both, tell the truth about what's happening and fight those different legal battles, but we also have to find that morale boost and show people a vision and a roadmap of we can win. We can call back to the civil rights history. We can call back to the struggles and the victories that we have won, including in local races and in these, library fights where folks have successfully defended their libraries and their books. We have to find a way not just to structurally allow our folks to participate, but to also restore their faith that participating matters and is even going to be able to deliver results. And that's going to be a process that might take a while, but I'm glad to be in it all with you. So if you do want to learn more about T.A.K.E and connect more with T.A.K.E, you can go to takebhm.org, look up T.A.K.E Resource Center on Twitter, now known as X, and Facebook and Instagram. Find us on those platforms. We'd love to get connected with you. We're definitely doing more town halls and more community meetings, and we're building. What I'm excited about is rapid response teams for this next legislative cycle, so we can get people to immediately, overnight, if a bill is filed, rally around fighting back faster than we have in the past. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And last words for you, Ms. Carmarion.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you again for the partnership, and to my fellow panelists, thank you so much for your yes. And I will say two things. Is one, before I speak about the voting, because this is part of voting, we are still leading at HRC, trying to get on a federal level the Equality Act passed. We understand that if we can get the Equality Act that is going to protect all LGBTQ plus individuals across the United States of America, some of the voting suppression tactics that are happening on the LGBTQ plus community will cease. But the Human Rights Campaign, we have a campaign that will lead up into next presidential election called Together We Vote. It's our voting center, and so we will be charged in the next couple months. You will start seeing our statewide office and our other offices of HRC and national start providing our webinars, defining our toolkit through webinars, because we understand visual learning and as well connecting as a community is very powerful, and it's also a motivation opportunity to empower those to make sure they go out and vote and they have a plan. I'm putting in the chat our voting center for those that are listening in or will see this recording afterwards. It is just basically hrc.org or HRC Voting Center. And what HRC stands for is the Human Rights Campaign. It's our acronym. And so you'll hear people say the Human Rights Campaign, HRC, on a good national dinner where we have fun. We may say the Human Rights Champagne. I don't know, but we've been around a long time. But there will be a lot of LGBTQ plus constituents that will partner with us in our voting center alongside Equality Federation. I have to lift them up as well because they do great work in the LGBTQ plus community as a coalition partner. And then there's other orgs as well that will be pushing out LGBTQ plus voting toolkit that we will partner with. So stay tuned. And I think that's all that I have to share as it relates to voting. But a plug-in, please, whatever you do off this phone, start preparing for our upcoming elections. We need to forever be prepared now. So if we're more prepared when the tactics come, we will automatically recognize them early. So our voice and our vote will count. And keep an eye out on the redistricting. There will be a court hearing October, please forgive me, I just drew blank. I want to say it's the 3rd. But there will be another court hearing based off the map, the 3rd, thank you, that was entered in that hopefully will dissolve where we will be and having that 2nd district. And I'll yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're going to real fast do our little quiz. Remember, we said there'd be a chance to earn a prize. We've got 2 $25 DoorDash gift cards from the Human Rights Campaign. After I ask the question, type your answer into the chat. Hosts and panelists will be able to see it. I'm not sure if everybody can, but we will for sure. The first correct answer will be the winner. And we'll announce your name if you're the winner, and please stay on the webinar until we get your mailing address so we can send you your prize. So everybody ready? The first question
Email address. I just need email address.
She just needs an email address. That makes it easy. First question. What date is the District 55 special election runoff happening? What date is the District 55? Who's DM? Because that's correct. First answer, somebody was quick. I hope that means you're showing up to vote that day. But yes, that absolutely is correct. Dory, got it. All right, second question. What is the age of consent for healthcare in Alabama? At what age do you become independent for consent for healthcare in Alabama? Laura, excellent. 14 years old. Very well done. All right, so you guys make sure.
Actually, let's modify that question because the age of consent technically for medical care is 19. They're emancipated if they choose to do STI testing at the age 14. So there's 2 different answers. So so thank you for that because everybody got variation. I think we should do one more question because I think that's important to say because that is the whole reason why we are still fighting the anti-transgender medical ban is because of the age of consent that we have here in Alabama. Yes, therapy consent is also 14 as well.
Okay. Another question is, earlier at the very beginning of the webinar, I mentioned that there was approximately how many anti-LGBTQ plus laws that had gone into force in states across the country. Anybody catch that number? I'll give it to the closest person. Anybody else want to throw some numbers in there? All right, so that'll go to Laura because the number was approximately 70. It's just a little bit over 70. All right. On behalf of the League of Women Voters and the Human Rights Campaign, thank you so much to everybody who joined us today. And from me, thank you to our panelists for joining us today. I learned a lot. There was an incredible amount of teaching, encouragement, a lot of positive energy, and just sharing resources with us. So Carmarion and Daye and VKY, thank you so much to each of you. And Daye, I really hope that you are 100% healed very, very soon. The League is really grateful for all of your partnership in empowering voters and encouraging civic activism to work towards equality for everyone. Please make sure you check out the Human Rights Campaign, T.A.K.E Birmingham, and the National Black Justice Coalition. Please support them, take advantage of the resources and support that they provide. Now I'm going to toss it back over to Jordan.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. First of all, thank you again to the League of Women Voters for co-hosting this webinar and to the panelists for joining us and the attendees for showing up. This video will live in perpetuity on Facebook Live for both the League of Women Voters and for HRC. I just want to give a plug out there to support the local organizations that are doing the work for the community. You can follow HRC Alabama, but also there's 15 to 20 different prides across Alabama throughout the year. So follow those organizations. They're always sharing local resources. This month alone, there's 3 Pride festivals coming up. That's a great time to get out there and not only meet other community members, but meet ally organizations that are doing the work for the community. And there's almost always a voter registration booth there. So lastly, if anyone, you or someone you know that needs any resources or access to resources, there's so many community partners throughout the state that are doing this work and can help you find access to resources. So always feel free to reach out to us through social media. We are always monitoring that and can respond to you there. But also I've dropped contact information for myself and Carmarion in the chat. You can feel free to reach out via email at any time. For those on Facebook Live, those emails are jordan.giddens@hrc.org, that's GIDDENS, and carmarion.anderson@hrc.org, that's CARMARION. So again, thank you so much, and I will toss it over to Kathy.
Thank you. Tonight's conversation was, I felt like we've all been working, like I thought, working along, fighting the same battles. We share a lot of the same just how do we try to fix the problems that exist in Alabama? And I feel like we're brought closer together, and everyone on this call, I believe as we leave this conversation tonight, we're really understanding that the threats and the attacks and the injustices that have been plaguing the LGBTQ community have been overlaid on the other problems that are affecting people in Alabama, the racism, the voter suppression, the barriers for people with disabilities. There are so many ways that it's harder to vote, it's harder to make your voices heard. And I think we're all trying to find the best way to work to overcome all of that, and don't forget the political corruption. And so we have a lot in common, and I'm looking forward to working closely with the folks on this call tonight. And there's plenty of opportunities, and we'd love to continue the journey throughout 2024 and beyond to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to vote. And I want to thank Stephanie for being our moderator, but I want to thank the panelists, because I appreciate your generous giving us your time and sharing your perspectives, because this is something that we desperately need to be able to understand and become better allies. I did want to take a moment and just mention that we have an ongoing series of educational forums. We feel like the more we hear, the more we provide opportunities to talk about issues, then we start understanding the issues that affect voters. And when you start talking to your elected leaders, like tonight, I think we've all got more things to go talk to our elected leaders about. On October the 14th, we've got a forum, and we'll send out a note to all the folks who registered tonight to let you know when these forums are. But it's about the new AVID system that Secretary of State Allen rolled out this past week, and it's going to focus on what are your rights with the National Voter Registration Act, and talking about voter roll maintenance, so that we all understand and understand the threats. If we don't have good voter rolls, why does that matter? And then on Monday, November the 6th, we've got a forum with the National Federation of the Blind of Alabama, with panelists also from Alabama Rise and the Community Action Transportation Coalition. And we're going to be talking about transportation issues that are affecting people with disabilities. All of these conversations, are really just kind of helping us become better and understanding where the issues are that we need to go tackle. And I want to thank you again for attending tonight, and wish you a good night, and get ready to vote, because it's important, and we're gonna make sure we're all seen and heard. Thank you.